This is the IBJ Podcast for the week of Monday, July 24th, 2023, brought to you by Taft. I'm your host, Mason King. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. You might remember that at this time last year, IBJ Media unveiled the inaugural issue of the Indiana 250. It's a compendium of the state's 250 most influential and impactful business and community leaders. Our definitions of influence and impact were intentionally broad, and our list included C-suite executives, not-for-profit leaders, civic bigwigs, lawyers, bankers, board chairs, artists, promoters, judges, philanthropists, and serial entrepreneurs. The biggest caveat was that we didn't include elected officials because their influence is obvious, and we like to highlight people who aren't necessarily as prominent. The beauty of the Indiana 250 concept is that the list is a living document, if you will, that's updated every year. Late last week, we unveiled the 2023 edition of the Indiana 250, and there has been significant turnover, with dozens of new honorees knocking others off the list. For this week's edition of the IBJ Podcast, I'll be joined by Nate Feltman, co-owner and CEO of IBJ Media, who will shed more light on the process of choosing honorees this year. We'll also shine a spotlight on 10 of the Hoosier leaders making their first appearances on the list. Here's our conversation. It's my pleasure to welcome back to the podcast Nate Feltman, CEO of IBJ Media, and my boss, Nate.
Good to be with you as always, Mason.
Thanks for joining me. So, as we indicated last year when the Indiana 250 debuted, being named to the list in the inaugural year was not a lifetime appointment.
Right.
So my understanding is the team set a goal this year that they wanted about 30% of the honorees on the second annual list to be new. That's about 75-ish people who would come off the list to make way for the new honorees. What was the purpose of making sure you had a critical mass of fresh faces?
Well, the good news is that there always are going to be fresh faces based on retirements and all the issues you can think about of somebody no longer being associated with important organizations that are driving important work in our communities and our state. So there are always going to be people who come on and off the list for that reason. And then, last year, as you might recall, we made a specific point to really recognize some of the outstanding leaders across the state of Indiana who've made fantastic contributions in their communities and statewide, but that were in the tail, kind of the tail end of their careers. And so there are a number of those folks, names that you all will recognize who've made amazing contributions that we moved off the list this year to make room for some younger, in some cases people who are just really active in their communities. And that, by the way, is an important element, as you'll recall. It's very important to us in selecting the individuals on this list that they are big contributors outside of their, maybe their day jobs, and they're contributing to the growth and the prosperity of their communities and the state as a whole in some cases. But that external engagement and involvement in the community is really a big quality, an important quality, I should say, that we look at when deciding who's on the list.
I should probably point out, just for people who think we all work in the same office, I was not involved in this process this year, but it's impossible not to pick up whiffs of the very sort of healthy debates that occur when you're deciding who's going to be on the list and who's not.
Sure.
Explain for the people outside the building, what is the process, or what was the process the second year for determining who's going to start this time and who's going to come off the bench and who is going to stay on the bench?
It's not too dissimilar from the process we had last year. We had nominations. So we start with nominations. We get lots of nominations from people across the state who want to nominate somebody who they think is worthy, influential, and making a big difference. And then, we also make an extra effort, as we did last year, to really call leaders, to set appointments and meetings with leaders around the state and get, if they haven't submitted somebody, to get them on the phone and talk to them about who's making a difference, who are true leaders in their region. And that is really, really, really helpful. So that's part of the process as well. And then, as mentioned, there is churn, and just in terms of people retiring and coming off the list, and there are people who have new jobs, new appointments, who are doing really big things. And I think we're going to talk about some of those folks later on.
Is it fair to say that the buck stopped with Nate on this list?
I would not say that. We have a very collaborative, iterative process. In this case, we have Gary Dick, Inside Indiana Business. We have Olivia Covington, who is the editor of The Lawyer, Indiana Lawyer, and Leslie Weidenbender, of course, who's the editor of the IBJ. All of us contribute to that process. And just like we do in a lot of our other honoree programs, we try to reach consensus. And I think we did a good job on that this year, where we did reach consensus around this list.
I have a few, because I'm sure people are interested, a few examples of people who were in the first and not in the second. And we can talk a little bit about, for example, just the reasoning behind it. First one, John Mellencamp.
Yeah.
Here's a guy who has a huge national following, is known by name, across the world, and is continually associated with Indiana. I mean, it has a lot of influence that way. Why not on the second year?
Well, we tried to recognize some people who, just as you described, are known, to be Indiana luminaries, people who are still living in Indiana. That's one of the qualifiers, and so that's an important aspect. But every year we're going to try to recognize some luminaries, and in Mellencamp's case, I mean, he did make some pretty interesting news, contributing his archives to IU. But we felt like we recognized them last year, and we want to make room for others.
Okay. Another name, also somebody, in the media spotlight, James Hinchcliffe, who was among the most popular racers in IndyCar before he moved over to be an NBC analyst on all of the IndyCar series races, and who has continued, I think, to be visible in Indianapolis with business interests and promotions.
Yeah, and it doesn't say that person's necessarily any less influential or important to our community by taking them off the list. Kind of to your earlier reference, in order to keep the list interesting, and frankly, there are so many people in Indiana, right? We're close to 8 million people in Indiana, and to limit it to 250, every year we should be recognizing people beyond, the 250. So we're gonna do that year to year, where we recognize some people one year, and then the next year, we'll recognize some others.
And here's somebody who, at least to my mind, was very much sort of a job-specific inclusion. Susan Bauman, who is the president of the 2022 College Football Playoff Host Committee here in Indianapolis.
Right.
Obviously, that was last year.
Right. And she made a huge contribution last year in that role. That was obviously an incredibly important event for our city, the national championship game that was held here last year. And that's a good example, right, where somebody's stepping up in a given year. That job's done for her, and we're waiting for the next big thing that she does so we can report on her hopefully next year.
Now, Leslie Weidenbender, who you mentioned, the editor of IBJ and also Indiana 250, has said that creating the second list of honorees was actually harder than compiling the first, because it wasn't just a matter of choosing 250 people. She knew that dozens of people would have to come off. Did you feel a similar consternation? And do you end up fielding calls from people wondering whether or not they're going to be on the list or why they weren't going to be on the list?
There's a little bit of consternation, but the interesting thing is that I think people on this list who have come off, I think they completely understand that recognizing incredible leadership, recognizing incredible contributions to our cities across the state and to the state as a whole, in some cases even around the world, it's important. And I don't think everybody expects to be appointed to the list every year. So I probably had a little less consternation than maybe some, because I think there is a recognition that it's good to recognize more people that are doing great work in the state.
Now, I think, from my perspective next to my computer and in editing stories for IBJ, that the purpose of the Indiana 250 is primarily its educational value for readers, to learn more about, the people who are animating the state. What do you see as the purpose beyond that educational value? What is it that we really want to achieve, of value to the state?
So there's a couple things in my mind that stand out, and I've hit on it probably multiple times already. And that is, I think when you recognize something and in some ways measure something, that maybe you entice other people to do that. In this case, it's community engagement, it's involvement, beyond what their day jobs are in making their communities better. And as I mentioned, that is an important trait, important quality that we look for. If someone happens to be, a CEO of a company, but is not engaged, or their company is not engaged beyond, what they do on a day-to-day basis, then it's highly unlikely that they're going to be nominated and highly unlikely that they're going to be picked. So incentivizing more good work that improves the quality of life for every Hoosier is really important to us. The second thing that I hope comes out of this, and I feel like this does happen, and especially seems to happen when we have an event, which we do for the 250, and it's just for them, is to again incentivize or entice collaboration from leaders across our state. And so, it's not often that leaders from South Bend and leaders from Evansville are in the same, two complete opposite ends of our state are in the same room together. And I believe that when you've got people who care about our state and care about their communities and throughout the state, that when you get them together, some really good things can happen. And so our hope is that, by having the event, by putting this together, this list together, that more of that can happen, and there can be more collaboration on important initiatives to the state. And there's lots of those that we know we need to work on.
Yeah, over the course of just covering the news here in Indiana, and this might maybe be a little bit simplistic, but I really feel like the state is growing less and less siloed into communities, where there are more and more projects that are reaching over the span of several counties,
Yes.
even like half of the state.
That's right.
I mean, part of it could be as simple as just connecting the southern part of the state with the central part of the state, with the new interstate.
Yeah.
Or you take a look at the READY projects that the state is doing that combine entire regions. Or the LEAP Innovation District that's occurring right now, where is really trying to take advantage of what they're, I guess, calling the hard tech corridor between Indianapolis and Lafayette.
Right.
So it would seem like this is really kind of the essence right now.
I think you're right. I mean, I think you're 100% right. And we know that is happening because, we are doing our Engage Indiana events around the state. We did, 7 cities this year. All the cities you can think of in terms of the larger ones, Fort Wayne, Evansville, South Bend, but now we added Valparaiso, Terre Haute, and Lafayette, Greater Lafayette. And when you're at those events, you can feel just what you just described, which is the regions and counties are working together more so, today than they have in really years. And I think you're right. I mean, a big contributor of that is the READY grant program, where they're incentivized to come together and think about projects that can really drive the regional economies. And I think you're right also that, the infrastructure improvements that have been made over the last couple decades really are starting to have a positive impact. But historically, I grew up in South Bend, and historically, I can tell you that, South Bend and the region, to the west did feel isolated and didn't feel as connected. And I think that, and I bet you, if you ask some of these leaders, I think they all would say that is really beginning to change, and we're making some real positive movement in that regard. And I hope that this list and the collaboration that we foster, at the event and beyond is a contributor. That's the goal.
Let's take a look at some of the new names on the list this year. And just for the sake of working with a round number, we have chosen 10 newcomers, not newcomers to the state, but newcomers to the list. These are in no particular order. I have to say that at least in a few instances, when I saw the name, my jaw crashed to the floor because I couldn't believe they weren't on the first list.
Yeah.
But obviously, as we've gone over in some detail here, this is not an exact science. But speaking of science, our first name is Richard DeMarchi. He's the co-founder of MBX Biosciences, distinguished professor and Gill Chair in biomolecular sciences at IU. Maybe more to the point, he is a serial entrepreneur that has been involved, not necessarily as an entrepreneur, in the development of some very important drugs.
Absolutely. Yeah, prolific entrepreneur, owner of many, many patents, I think close to 100 or more, has been, key at Lilly before, certainly getting into kind of more private sector. And I shouldn't say private sector, in terms of generating new companies and new ideas. In his case, MBX that you mentioned has moved its headquarters to the state of Indiana and is really, attracting a lot of attention, a lot of money, a lot of dollars, a lot of venture capital dollars. And he's a no-brainer to add to the list as a result. And he would have been a no-brainer last year, but like I mentioned before, we were somewhat constrained. So he's a good example of somebody who's made unbelievable contributions, and I think his contributions are only going to grow as company like MBX grows, and hopefully there'll be more right behind it.
Okay, let's take a quick break so we can hear from our sponsor. This is the IBJ Podcast.
Taft, today's modern law firm. With more than 800 attorneys in 8 primary Midwest markets and the District of Columbia, we provide solutions to the business issues facing middle market and emerging companies alike. We do this through a highly collaborative and inclusive team approach. Taft, the modern law firm. To learn more, visit taftlaw.com.
All right, we're back with this week's edition of the IBJ Podcast and our conversation with IBJ Media CEO Nate Feltman about the Indiana 250. Next on our list, we have Mung Chiang, newly installed president of Purdue University, West Lafayette, as of January 1st of this year, hence his inclusion. I think everyone can assume Mr. Chiang is as close to a slam dunk as you possibly could get on this list.
Yes.
You spoke with him before, what can you say about him?
Well, I can say, he, of course, he follows in the footsteps of a great leader, Mitch Daniels, but he is ready to rock and roll. I mean, he is, championed along with Pam Whitten the separation of IUPUI, and he did it because he realizes the opportunity for more opportunities for Purdue students, but experiential opportunities in Indianapolis, and realizes the impact that the two separate universities can have in Indianapolis and in the region, the greater region. He's fully on board with this LEAP district where Lilly is going to be situated in Lebanon. And, has talked about this hard tech corridor that can be created between West Lafayette and Indianapolis. He's talking about things that are going to move the needle, right? And he's not just talking about them; he's doing them, with partners. And Purdue has always been an absolute incredible asset for our state, and I can see already in a short tenure he's going to push the envelope to have an even stronger impact in our state. So it's exciting to have him at the helm.
And when we talk about workforce issues, which has, been a persistent question in from the state, for forever, but especially in the most recent years, to the extent that we rely on a university, especially like Purdue, that is so strong in the STEM fields, to get people prepared for all of these open jobs that we have, that, we hope are going to bring larger companies and more sophisticated companies to Indiana. He is on top. He's in charge of that.
He is. And, the number of, what the other pretty awesome thing, in addition to what you described, is what's happening in Greater Lafayette in terms of company formation and in terms of just new companies coming, chip companies. The list goes on in terms of Saab and many others who are putting research centers and putting, manufacturing facilities, in Lafayette area. And clearly they're attracted to what what you're describing, the talent there. And I think that will continue under his leadership. He's very focused, as of course was Mitch.
We'll take a left turn here to Ashley Flowers. She's the founder and chief creative officer for the podcasting and online content company AudioChuck. Most folks probably know her by her most famous creation, Crime Junkies, which I think as of last year was the most popular podcast in America.
Yeah. And so, she moved her company, AudioChuck, created it and moved it and is growing it, right here in central Indiana. And so that got our attention. And as you described, she's one of the most popular podcasters out there with Crime Junkies. And she's also a New York Times bestselling author. If I remember right, it's author of All Good People here. And it's a novel. And I assume it's still doing well. But she's doing some pretty amazing stuff. And and to recognize someone like that who decided to grow their company, they could do it in California, they could do it in New York, but they're choosing to do it right here in Indiana, and that's pretty awesome.
Next, let me bring up Alice Watson. She's the president and CEO of Indiana Black Expo in Indianapolis. I think this is a great example of somebody who definitely has been influential on the local and the state level for many years, but who now has a higher profile position and more responsibility.
Right. Yeah. And I think she's been with the Black Expo for quite a long time, but now has the opportunity to lead as its CEO. And, we just finished, if I got timing right, the summer celebration that Black Expo put on last week. And by all accounts, it was a big success. And so her leadership, she's been involved in important issues in the city for quite some time. Now her leadership of Indiana Black Expo got her on the list.
We'll take another turn here to an area, certainly of the economy, that I know you're really familiar with. David Rosenberg. He's the Chief Operating Officer and Chief of Staff for the Indiana Economic Development Corp. The IEDC, obviously, is one of the primary drivers of economic development in Indiana and a kind of connective tissue between the state and the private sector. But the position of COO and the Chief of Staff typically are not real high profile. What can you tell us about those positions and David?
Well, David's been doing great things in the state and in the city for quite a long time. He's a young, rising leader. I know for a fact that he's been in the middle of really important deals over the last couple of years. And so he's a rising star in our city and state. He was certainly involved in the LEAP, the district that we've been talking about, where Lilly will make its big investment. I know he also has been critical in terms of the new tools that IEDC was able to secure this last legislative session, and very involved and engaged in making sure the legislature understood how important those tools would be and for the economy of the future that the IEDC is driving for. So he's one of these rising stars that we wanted to make sure made the list this year.
Another name from the public sector, Elaine Beadle, Secretary and CEO of the Indiana Destination Development Corp. She's also the founder and CEO of Beadle Financial Consulting, which manages more than $2 billion in investment portfolio assets. I know that the Destination Development Corporation is a new facet of the Indiana state government. What is she doing and why has she risen to the top?
So Elaine has been involved in economic development for quite some time. She actually served at the Indiana Economic Development Corporation previously as its president, and then moved over when I think it was a couple of years ago now, when the legislature created this Indiana Destination Development Corp, which is the former tourism agency, right? And so one of the reasons we put her on the list is that they just got a big chunk of money from the legislature, a huge chunk of money to really get out there and advertise around the globe, what Indiana has to offer. And you're starting to see some of that. Maybe not seeing yet the new dollars, but they've already had some, branding that you see along the state highways. And we think that she has the opportunity to really help get the message out about why Indiana is a good place to come and work, to live, to grow a business. And the work that she does in combination with the Indiana Economic Development Corporation to get that message out, it's something I hear all the time from leaders that we're not doing well enough. And so we're excited that the legislature decided to give her more of an opportunity to try to get the message out about why Indiana is a great place to be.
Okay. Let's move over to the arts for a second. We have Alan Bacon. He's a co-founder and president of Gang Gang, a cultural development and social justice organization that grew out of the George Floyd protests in 2020. It's probably best known right now, the organization, for staging the Fine Arts Fair known as Butter that has become a nationally known affair, I think, very quickly.
Yeah, the work that they're doing and he's doing in the arts throughout central Indiana, focusing on promoting diversity in the arts, we thought was really important, and we added him to the list in that regard. And we hope they keep doing more of what they're focused on today.
Here is another one of my jaw droppers. It's Mike Cunningham. The name may ring a bell for some people. He's the president and CEO of Indianapolis-based Cunningham Restaurant Group. They have something along the lines of 40 different restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
Again, this is an Indianapolis-based company that has grown to really an incredible size and an amazing amount of influence, culinarily speaking. I think has 7 highly rated restaurants downtown alone, including, 2 or 3 of the top rated restaurants. What can you tell us about Mike?
Well, he has been quietly doing just what you described, just putting together amazing new restaurant concepts, chefs, and getting, national recognition in many cases. One of the things that caught our eye this year was the deal that they put together with the Pacer Sports and Entertainment, to put a new restaurant, a new concept there. But he isn't somebody who's often in the public eye, but we see is having a huge impact in terms of the quality of life scene, the food scene that often is, for a lot of young people, helps drive people to choose cities sometimes. So he's doing it and doing it very, very well. So we thought he was very well deserving.
Next up, we have an honoree who very appropriately will probably spark some debate on this list. It's Greg Doyle.
Yeah.
Indianapolis Star sports columnist.
Yeah. I've always been personally a huge fan of Greg Doyle. I love the fact that there's no holds barred when you read a Greg Doyle column, right? I mean, he'll tell you exactly how he feels, whether it's and of course it's on the hometown sports teams, right? And there's something to be said about that, right? And so he stood out. Some other interesting things about Greg that stood out. I had no idea until we dug a little more that he was an amateur boxer, and it was 4-0 as an amateur boxer.
Yeah, he was a white collar boxer.
That's pretty cool. So
I think he might have been 4-1.
Did he lose one?
I think his last bout, was against like a former MMA fighter or something, or somebody who was involved like in professional fighting. And it was an ugly scene.
Well, he's been going at it on the local sports scene for a long time and has done a tremendous job. And so we wanted to recognize. We recognized some other journalists last year, and this is another example of where we want to recognize the good work that's going on in the city.
And again, it's important to have a loud leading voice that is credible.
Yeah.
And he's been here for a while. I don't know if it's been 10 years yet. And it's easy, I think, to get used to, the quirks of a particular writer. And he definitely has his, and he'll be the first one to point them out. But it's important to have somebody that can say something fresh about what's happening, with the teams that you care about.
Yeah. And he's had great experiences. I know he's been based a lot of other places, Miami, Charlotte, Tampa, and he just brings an incredible level of professionalism, journalism. Even though some, in the city might say he goes too far, I love it. I mean, I just love that it's no holds barred, as I mentioned.
Well, you can always write a column 2 days later that mends those fences.
Yes, that's right.
So our last name is Marla Thompson, who is Senior Vice President at Salesforce. Salesforce, as my 7-year-old will tell you, was the tallest building, Salesforce Tower, tallest building in Indianapolis. Obviously very prominent. It is the successor, if you will, to ExactTarget, which was an amazing success story in the cloud marketing sphere here in Indianapolis. But, and this is just my perspective, I don't feel like we hear very much about the leadership at Salesforce. I know that Marla is on a few very important boards or executive committees.
Well, the important thing to remember is that she just stepped into this role not too long ago as the site leader for Salesforce here in Indianapolis. And so I think, we're going to see more and more of what Marla is going to do, in terms of a leader at Salesforce here locally. They're obviously still an incredibly important company to this city and employ a lot of technology talent. And so we thought she was certainly deserving. She also, we know, has had a big impact on their business, and just in the line that she oversees, their marketing cloud business. My understanding is that they've doubled that business under her leadership the last few years. So, we expect more and more good things, and Salesforce has been a great corporate contributor to the community in lots of different ways, and they're continuing to do so. In fact, they're hosting a gathering of the Indiana 250. So thank you, Marla, and thank you, Salesforce.
Right on. As was true last year, I have to say some of the things that I enjoy most about the Indiana 250 are the questions designed to reveal more about the honorees' interests and personalities. And Marla, for example, says that her first job was detasseling corn, which I think a lot of people in Indiana will identify with, from which she learned that she would much rather work in an office.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's a lot of jobs like that you're going to see when you open up. And I encourage everybody to open up the Indiana 250 magazine because you're going to find some really fun, interesting facts. I mean, I'll give you a couple interesting facts. And I'm not going to tell you who they're associated with, though, because you got to open the Indiana 250 magazine to figure it out. But we've got a former police officer. You wouldn't guess who this is. A former police officer who delivered a baby in a snowstorm. And I would never have figured out who that was, given their current job. We've got somebody who played golf with Mickey Mantle. That's pretty cool, the baseball player. We've got somebody who medaled in Irish dance as a kid, and you're never going to figure out, Dennis Murphy, who that was. So that's quite extraordinary. We got somebody, get this, who rode a unicycle all over Southport while dribbling a basketball in order to improve their dribbling skills for their school team. And so you'll have to see who that is. And apparently the person still has that unicycle. So they've kept it as a memento.
Now, if I didn't know that we do not have elected leaders on this list, I would have said Governor Holcomb.
No, exactly. No, that would be shooting a basketball in every gym around the state. But no elected leaders on this list. That's right. But there's a lot of fun facts, but there's also some serious facts, like their ideas on leadership, their advice for young people, what they would change about the state of Indiana. Those are things that I think are really interesting to see from a group of 250 leaders. And so you'll have to open up the magazine to see who those things are associated with. But it's a great read. I couldn't put it down when I first got my copy earlier this week. So
I know we're going to have the event where we get the honorees together here in a day or two, and that'll be a little bit before this podcast airs. So, but you're not going to get the feedback, or you don't have the feedback yet that you're going to get from that event. Do you have any sense of what we can expect from the third edition of Indiana 250?
The third edition. Well, gosh, we're just getting this one under our belt, Mason. But we'll continue to try to do what we've done this year, which is again recognize people who are making a difference in the state. And my guess is it's going to get harder and harder as we go to take people off, because as I mentioned, we did intentionally recognize some people who've just been making contributions for a long time to the state in the first edition. But we're going to work hard at it to really make sure we've got a quality list. We'll do the same things we've done in the past, which is reach out around the state. It is a fun process, and hopefully, I won't get too many eggs thrown at my house or car as a result of this year or next year.
I think we'll just hire people to throw eggs at your house.
Right, exactly.
Great. Well, you're right. It's a fantastic read. It's a great resource.
Oh, awesome, Mason. Well, it's been a lot of fun, and we're looking forward to launching it this week and seeing what people's reaction is to the list.
Great. Well, thanks for making time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Mason.
My thanks again to Nate Feltman. FYI, IBJ subscribers can read the profiles of this year's honorees at Indiana250.com. And those who choose to get our print products get the Indiana 250 issue in the mail. It's also available for purchase from IBJ Media. Before you get on with the rest of your week, though, there are a few stories in the latest issue of IBJ I want to draw to your attention. First up, Mayor Joe Hogsett's administration plans to test a state law regarding the kinds of properties and businesses that could be declared public nuisances and liable for the city's costs when responding to problems. Taylor Wooten has that story. Mickey Shuey goes behind the scenes at the Indiana State Museum's IMAX Theater and the extraordinary preparations required for showing the big screen epic Oppenheimer. And Peter Blanchard explains why a growing number of retired Hoosiers are deciding to get back into the workforce. And again, you can find these stories in the latest print edition of IBJ or online at IBJ.com. I will say that it is easier to access all of the latest local news about business and politics and all of IBJ's data on Central Indiana's business, community, and economy if you're a subscriber. And here's the new development. We have wrapped all of IBJ's content together with all of the stories, columns, and podcasts from our sister publication, Inside Indiana Business. And now works out to just about $3 per week for actionable information about every notable business development across the state. You won't find Indiana's story told with this kind of breadth and depth anywhere else. Just go to IBJ.com, click on the subscribe button. And thanks again for making time this week for the IBJ Podcast. I'm Mason King. Hang in there, everybody. We'll be back again next week.